BrainStorm. BrainStorm 9000.
Greetings, world of the internet. Welcome to another episode of BrainStorm 9000, hashtag BS9000.
I hope, despite of this BS hashtag that Master McMaster just gave us, you are still keeping your brains open.
Yeah, actually, that could mean a lot of different things, couldn't it?
Yeah, by the way, I'm Dr. Schultz, and my first name is Edward, so BS doesn't work for me that much. But if my name were to be Boris, then it would be BS.
There you go. You know what else it could mean? Bullshit.
Yeah. Bachelor of Science.
There's another one.
Or my favorite medical term, bowel syndrome.
Is that a medical term?
Yeah, irritable bowel syndrome.
There's just so many options. Boy Scouts.
Yes, Bodhisattva.
British show jumping. That's a real thing.
Really?
Yeah.
What do they do?
They jump horses. In Britain.
That must be very smart.
Bloody smart. Nope, that was
Exactly.
not British. Let's try it again. Bloody smart.
Exactly.
All right, all fuckery aside,
Right.
here in this sacred airspace, BS sounds for brainstorm. But we're very open to creative interpretation. So, audience, feel free to share some of those with us.
On all the social media outlets.
Hashtag BS9000. What does it mean to you? Yeah, so in today's sacred Brainstorm 9000 airspace, we are going to talk about something that is plaguing American brains and brains across the world. Drug addiction.
Yes. It is a horrible situation, actually. And I should be saying it because I lost the very best friend I ever had to addiction. He overdosed at age 42. And I've been thinking about it for quite a long time because it happened in the early 2000s after I came to the United States. At that time, when I left the Soviet Union in 1988, drug addiction there was either hush-hush or wasn't that much spread. Of course, we have to remember about the drinking. Alcohol addiction was and still is very prevalent there. But what has been happening, in my opinion, is that more and more people have been exposed to non-human experiences with non-natural substances. So humans make substances to provide humans with non-human experiences. For example, yes, people always used wine. In ancient Greece, probably in Rome.
All over the place.
In many, many traditions, which is a natural product. Tobacco that American Indians smoked hundreds and hundreds of years ago in a circle, passing the pipe to create a sense of unity, a sense of community, of course, was not only a non-GMO, it was very natural. And of course, it's very difficult for me to imagine an American Indian walking in the middle of the forest smoking a cigarette. So wine was acceptable. And then people accepted distilled alcohol, which is not as natural. Actually, is not natural at all. And of course, has a significantly more profound effect on the brain. Even pot that people smoke nowadays is, in quotes, stronger, end of quote.
Yeah.
And
It's that chronic shit.
Heroin is also not a natural product. Most of the opiates used currently are artificially created, and the outrageous example, which is going to be described in more detail by Dr. Perkel in the next part of our three-part installment, is extremely potent. So because it's such a huge problem, I suggested we start from the interview that I had with Mark, who is in recovery. This name is fake in an effort to protect his identity. He's been in recovery for a few years and has been very successful, as he's going to tell us. What is great about him that he's going to very openly discuss a lot of painful issues that other people are afraid to. And then in the second installment, we are going to have a chance to listen to a doctor who worked most of his life with drug addiction, Dr. Pirkel. And then we are hoping that in the third installment, we are going to give a chance a person who is also in a long-term recovery to talk about their experience with other drugs.
Yeah, so for the first two installments of this very enlightening series, we're going to be focusing primarily on opioid addiction because, fuck, what a doozy.
Yes.
And then we're going to branch out into looking at other kinds of addictions. It's going to be super interesting.
So please open your brains
Yes.
to Mark.
And without further ado, let's hear from Mark.
My name's Mark. I struggled with heroin addiction for about 5 years, and today I'm a little over 2.5 years clean.
As you and I spoke before we started the recording, I worked for a number of years with drug addiction issues in different formats, and have been unfortunately taught by my professional life that staying sober from heroin is very difficult. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Hardest thing I've ever had to do. And it's still a daily struggle.
Yeah, I actually spoke with over, I would dare to say, a few thousand heroin addicts throughout my professional life, asking everybody the same question. Is there anything that a person can experience in regular life better than the heroin high? What would you say, honestly?
No. At least, not immediately. Maybe things that you have to work for over time, but to get like immediate satisfaction, there's nothing that even comes close. In the movie Trainspotting, in the beginning, the main character talks about how he says, take the best orgasm you've ever had and multiply it by 1,000 or something like that, and you're still nowhere near how good it feels, and I agree with that.
So how do you stay sober if there is nothing to replace it with?
A combination of things.
First of all, why did you decide to become sober?
I decided to because I got to a place where I was extremely hopeless. I was waking up every day wanting to kill myself, but too scared to do it, and B, I had put my family and friends through enough. I felt as though I didn't want to put them through anything more than I'd already put them through by killing myself, Mm-hmm. So I basically stayed alive, A, because I was too scared to do it on my own, and B, because I didn't want to burden my loved ones with anything else.
But why did you want to kill yourself? What was wrong? You were getting high every day.
Well, yeah, the high is great, but after even a month or two of everyday use, you get to a point where you're just using to feel normal. You're not even getting high anymore. And everything that goes with it is absolute misery. Feeling sick, screwing everyone over that you care about. I started with pills, and my pill addiction quickly got to $200 a day. And then I switched to heroin when I found out that a bundle of heroin in Connecticut was $35.
Let's tell people who could be drug naive. So what is a bundle and what is a brick, so people know?
A bundle is 10 bags of heroin. A brick is 5 bundles, so 50.
Have you ever met anybody who does a brick?
A brick a day? Maybe like 1 or 2 people, but that would have to be low quality. I feel like because I feel like a brick would kill. It would have killed me. The most I ever did in a day was 2.5 bundles.
So you were saying you found out that it was cheaper to do heroin?
Yeah, cheaper and a lot stronger. Like the pills, it was like a $200 a day addiction, and I was getting nothing out of it. Whereas with heroin, intravenous use, the high was way more intense and instant. And it was like $200 or $35 to $70 a day. It was a no-brainer for me, especially if I was getting higher with the $35 to $70 habit.
So money talks.
Yeah, and so like with that addiction also came a daily like struggle of who am I gonna screw over, who am I gonna steal from, because I couldn't steal from people that I didn't know. They would call the police, but if I stole from family or loved ones, they wouldn't call the police, at least not in the beginning. So it was just a daily. I would hurt people that were close to me on a daily basis through manipulation to get what I needed.
But how it all started? What made you?
So, I mean, it was a couple things. Long story short, you know, I always hear in like A and NA meetings like all these horrifying stories of people who were like raped or had a horrible childhood, and I always feel terrible because I don't have a story like that. For me, I overall had a decent childhood with some struggles, but not anything different from the average person. For me, it was just in college, I was very much about experimenting and trying different things. And one night, a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to split an oxy with him, and it was just something I'd never tried before, and I was open to it. I had tried a whole bunch of other drugs in the past and never gotten addicted to them, so I didn't see why this would be different. But I was very naive because I didn't know that I was gonna love this way more than any of the other stuff I had tried in the past. If I knew where it was gonna lead to, I would have never taken that half of a pill that night. So I started that night, and for about a year and a half, you know, I was doing them here and there, oxys, and then next thing I knew, I woke up one day sick without them. I don't even remember when the crossover happened. Mm-hmm. Just went from like a weekend thing to all of a sudden I'm very depressed and physically sick without them.
And then what happened?
So, you know, I at the time I was very naive about addiction. I didn't know a whole lot. So I tried to educate myself and tried to get clean. I remember the first time I was really sick, it was my senior year of undergrad. I was home for spring break, and I spent my spring break, trying to get clean. It was actually very convenient at the time that it just so happened that I was going home, because if I was at school, I wouldn't have been able to go to class or get anything done. So in my mind, I was like, oh, this is perfect. I'm home for 10 days. I'll get clean, and then I'll go back to school, and, you know, everything will be back to normal. I had no idea that was like only the start of it. That was going to be the first of many, many times where I would be sick. So what happened was I got through the 10 days. It was absolute misery, just both physically and mentally. I mean, and the physical part is actually the easier part. You know, it hurts like hell, and it feels like you're going to die, but you actually can't die from opiate withdrawal.
It hurts where?
I mean, all over. You get lower back pain, restless legs, pain in your legs. It feels like, you know, when you have the flu and your body is very weak, it feels like that, like times 10. Constant alternating between diarrhea and vomiting. And then mentally, it's worse. It's you're just depressed, and your craving is you know, skyrockets from when you're normal. So that's the hardest part, is like fighting through the mental obsession when you're sick, you know, because I could have just gone down the street and picked up, and I wouldn't have been sick anymore.
Is that easy?
Yeah. So I got through it. I went back to school, and for, I think it was like 3 weeks, I didn't use, and I thought I had this beat. Again, I knew nothing about addiction at the time. And my birthday rolled around, and my friends from home came to visit me up at school. And one of them, who doesn't have an addiction to anything, but just likes to party and experiment, decided that he wanted to do an oxy on my birthday too. And I saw him doing it, and I was like, it's my birthday, I'll do it also. And that just started the cycle all over again. And it just escalated from there. So it was like that for a while, just like with the pills. It was when I went down to South Florida to get clean after I had graduated, which I should mention, by the way, I graduated by the skin of my teeth. I'm so lucky that my addiction didn't take off until my last semester of undergrad. Prior to my addiction, as much as I loved to party and experiment and all that, I had a healthy balance of studying and learning in school was my biggest passion, and I love to learn, and my main goal and focus at the time was grad school, and all of that fell to the wayside with addiction. So I went from having a cumulative GPA of a 3.7 to my last semester I got a 2.1, which only brought my cumulative down to like a 3.4 or a 3.5. But had I had another semester, I know I would not have finished. I barely graduated, and so I'm very lucky in that aspect. So after graduation, I went down to Florida to try and get clean.
Why Florida?
I had some friends who in the past who struggled with opiate addiction that went down to Florida. In South Florida, there's it's known for having many inpatient treatment centers. I mean, you could go anywhere, but I just knew some friends that had gone down there and had success. So I thought, why not do the same thing? Get away from New York for a while, change my environment and start new. And it actually just only progressed from there. When I went to inpatient near Delray Beach in South Florida, I learned more about addiction in inpatient from my peers than I had ever learned before, and my curiosity just expanded. I learned about heroin and how to shoot up, all these things I had no idea of before. I couldn't even fathom. And it was my roommate in inpatient who we relapsed together. I had gotten a few oxys, and he got 2 bundles, I think it was, and I was snorting the pills, and he was shooting heroin up into his arm, and I saw his face, and I said, I want you to do that to me. And the first time I shot heroin was about a week after I got out of inpatient in Florida in a sober house with my roommate from inpatient. He shot me up, and yeah, that was the first time I shot up. And at first I switched back and forth between snorting pills and shooting heroin, but that only lasted for about a month before it became solely shooting. That in and of itself, like intravenous use in and of itself, became an addiction, like the ritual, and
How do you mean?
It's easier to understand if you're an addict, but just the whole process of like cooking up the heroin and mixing it in the spoon and drawing it up through the cotton in the needle, and then especially when you have to find a vein, and when you put the needle in your arm and you're trying to find a vein, if you're not in a vein, no blood will fill the syringe. And often when you're a habitual user, it's very hard to find a vein because they're all like either collapsed or gone or messed up because of the daily use. But in the beginning, it's very easy to find a vein. And what happens is when you do find a vein, the whole needle fills up with blood. So that was a rush in and of itself, just like finally finding a vein and seeing the needle turn from whatever color it was, usually is like a little yellowish. The heroin mixed with water, it was a little yellowish, but then as soon as you would see the red fill up, it was like that in and of itself was like, all right, you're in. You can push the plunger down, and you're gonna get high. So yeah, that was an image that repeated in my head all the time after my first trip to inpatient, because I had subsequent trips to inpatient, and I'm in there without my substance of choice, and all I could replay in my head is just the needle filling up with blood whenever I'd be craving, which was almost always.
How many days about were your inpatient adventures?
The shortest time I was ever in inpatient was 22 days, and the longest was 45.
So it wasn't enough for any craving to go away, right? You
No.
come out craving.
Absolutely, yeah.
So in your opinion, was there any benefit? In your opinion?
Yes and no. I mean, me studying social work and becoming a social work is in part because of my issues with inpatient treatment. That's a whole other subject where I could talk until tomorrow morning about how I feel about inpatient treatment.
How do you feel about inpatient treatment? Not until
I think the
tomorrow.
whole system is screwed up. I think that it's a business. I think they're preying on people who have addictions and are looking for help, and they exploit that.
That's how you feel. They exploit you.
Yeah, I mean, you see, so my mother's a nurse practitioner, and she has amazing insurance. I could get in. I mean, I had been in treatment with celebrities before. It wasn't like a constant thing, but this is the kind of places I got into. Her insurance could get me into anywhere. And these places you would see in magazines where they would say, we offer acupuncture, massages, equine therapy. You have a nutritionist that comes several times a week, like all these awesome amenities on top of just the facilities themselves being pristine and beautiful. And they just offered all these things so that it's appealing to someone who needs help. When really, like, as cool as all that stuff is, that's not the stuff that really helps get to the core issue, that helps you get clean. So yeah, I'm going to these places that are, at the end of the day, they were like a 28-day spa almost. And it's just like I was taking a break from using, not really solving the issue. It's just like, incarcerating addicts and alcoholics. Like, that's just putting a Band-Aid on a hemorrhage. It's not really, once they get out, they haven't worked on their issues, and once they get out of jail or prison, they're just going to repeat the same behaviors.
So there were no groups, or not enough?
There were, but a lot of the groups were run by people with 9 to 12 months clean, like, where there is, I don't discredit that. There is a lot to be learned from people who have gotten clean, but I think one of the best ways is to have someone who has both the experience and the education, because someone with 9 to 12 months clean that has no education, and you just give them a lanyard that says the name of the treatment center and tell them to run a group, it's like they don't know what they're doing. 9 months ago, they were living on the street, and now they're running a group and telling me how I should live and what I should do. I mean, there were therapists and caseworkers there, but let's take this one facility. It's 28 days, right? So 4 weeks. My therapist, I saw at most 2 hours a week for individual sessions. So that's 2 hours a week. That's 8 hours over 28 days that I'm paying, or my insurance is paying, upwards of $1,000 a day. All these places were between $1,000 to $1,500 a day to see a therapist and go over my issues for 2 hours a week. Whereas the rest of the groups are mostly run by, former addicts who don't have a lot of time clean. So it is very, one thing is when you see it on the computer or in a magazine, these places look like they're going to help you, especially when you and your family don't know a lot about addiction. You don't know where to go. Like, what direction do you follow if you have no direction? So in our heads, it's like, well, if our insurance can cover this place that costs this much, it must cost this much for a reason. It must be a good facility. But I found that after someone goes to treatment once in this country, there's not much you can learn after one treatment, because they're like, I guess if you want to call it like coursework or whatever, or their structure is based on a 4-week cycle. So they teach whatever they teach you over 4 weeks, and then after 4 weeks, it starts over again. So you could go to any treatment center across the country, and after you've been once, they're just teaching you the same thing over and over again. I went to treatment in Las Vegas, Connecticut, New York, and South Florida, and California.
Have you ever tried therapeutic communities?
No, that's actually the one thing that I haven't tried that I probably should have. At the time, I was so stubborn. You think it was hard to get me to go to a 28-day treatment, let alone anything like therapeutic communities. That's a commitment, and that's probably what would have got me clean faster.
But you don't know because you don't have a personal experience.
I don't have any personal experience with. I mean, all I know is what I've heard about therapeutic communities, and what I heard from several people is that they're like a year to 2 years long, and I was like, no way. Like, I didn't even want to go to a 28-day program, let alone a year to 2 years, even though that's probably what would have been best for me.
Have you ever tried any medication to help you to stay sober other than methadone? We'll get there.
Yeah.
Medication, I mean, not stuff like Suboxone, methadone, Vivitrol.
You mean like SSRIs?
They say, because there are some groups all over the country that claim that they found a solution for drug addiction because they diagnose you with an underlying issue and then treat it, and then your addiction goes away. Have you ever tried that?
I have. I think that there's a lot of value in medication, and everyone's different. I think that whatever works for someone is what they should do. I don't think there's one answer to solving addiction or one size fits all. For me, medication was one component of several. That it was a combination of several things that worked for me. So medication alone, if this answers your question, no, I don't think it would cure addiction, but I think it would help in conjunction with other things like psychotherapy and support groups and stuff like that.
I'm asking you because one of the things that AA used to propagate was a drug-free and medication-free environment. Have you been to AA?
Yeah, I was in AA and NA, more so AA for 4.5 years, and I have such a them I could talk about even more than the treatment centers. Now, I don't discredit AA and NA. That's not the message I'm trying to give. Again, whatever works for you is, I think, what people should do. I can only speak for myself and my experience. And I mean, I had a potential sponsor turn me down because I told him I took Prozac. And he said, I will only sponsor you if you get off Prozac. And this is a guy who has no medical experience whatsoever. He's just an alcoholic. Which, by the way, as a side note, for people that don't know, you can still go to AA if you're an addict. You just replace the word alcohol with whatever your substance of choice is. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, in AA, I listened to what they told me for 4.5 years and there were times where I half-assed it for sure, but there were more times where I gave 110% because I wanted to change so badly. I wanted to stop hurting my family. I wanted to stop hurting myself. I wanted some kind of a life. And I did everything they told me, and I failed repeatedly over and over again. Again, I don't discredit it. I have a lot of friends who have had success through AA or NA, and more power to them. But for me, it didn't work. And one thing they really preached against was, like you said, medication, especially Suboxone or methadone. So for a long time, I was very much opposed to even giving either of those medications consideration. But all I knew was what I was told in AA. I had no knowledge from anywhere else. So if that's where all my knowledge is coming from, that's what I think is right. And it finally occurred to me after years of doing what they told me and failing, that something is not, I need to change it. I need to do something else. I mean, one of their sayings that they live by in AA is, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So why would I keep going to AA if I kept failing? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Methadone is so looked down upon in AA. I mean, I remember in treatment them telling us when methadone would come up, they would whip out the AA big book and recite lines from the introduction where it said something along the lines of, people who cannot or will not stay sober are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. They are such unfortunates, and they are not at fault. They're just born that way. It's like, are you fucking kidding me? I mean, I want to rip that page out of the book, because as much as I don't discredit AA, I do discredit that statement. I mean, how can you say that about someone? So I do everything you told me, and I'm still failing. So I guess I'm constitutionally incapable of being honest, and I'm just born that way. I'm just faulty, according to AA. So I've had almost every therapist and peers and staff members in inpatient treatment and and people in AA tell me not to take methadone. But it's funny because once I stopped going to AA and took my life into my hands, because in AA they say, let go, and you don't have control over anything, which I believe that to a degree. I think you need to have a degree of acceptance in your life. At least I did. But I finally was like, this is bullshit. Like, my life is in my hands. I'm miserable, and nothing is going to change unless I do something about it. So I stopped going to AA. I started on the methadone program. I started taking antidepressants, which it was the 6th antidepressant that I tried that finally worked for me. Before that, all the ones I took, like 6 to 8 weeks would go by, and I'd be like, is it, because they say, sometimes it takes 4 to 6 weeks for it to work. I'd be like, is it just not working yet? When I finally found the one that worked, it was like literally after 3 days, the difference was like night and day.
So you decided to go to the methadone program?
I did. And, one thing that they preach about in AA and NA is that, you can get high off methadone. Well, my response to that is you can get high off methadone if you have no tolerance for opiates. But someone like myself who has years of daily use under my belt, the first week I took it, week to 2 weeks, I was just extremely exhausted. But after that, I'm on methadone right now. Do I look high to you guys?
No.
I maintain a job. I have my family's trust back. I'm in grad school, all because of methadone. Someone who has a tolerance for opiates does not get high off methadone.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's a very important point that I would like to make, and not to make you feel better, although it will happen probably. You are sober not because of methadone. You are sober because of you. Because you have a desire to live sober life. Methadone is just a substance that you found is helpful in your case for sobriety. I met in my life an enormous number of people who go to drug treatment programs and AA, not because they want to stay sober, but because they ran out of money, because their family cannot be tricked into giving them benefits they want.
Court mandated.
Very good point. In some of the correctional institutions, people stay sober because drugs are not available, and some they are available. Unfortunately, it's true, and we may like it or dislike it, but that's how it is. So the main reason you are sober is because you wanted to be sober, which makes you very different from, would you say, a lot of people you met, or a few people? Most of the people want to stay sober. You think that you met in different programs, or what is your opinion?
I think that a lot of people think that they want to stay sober, or not necessarily always think, but they want to be sober, which I struggled with for a long time, because I loved the high, and it got me out of everything I struggled with. It helped me with my fears. Getting
high.
Yeah, it covered up my character defects. I struggled with self-esteem issues. I used to be very insecure, but had a huge ego. One of the main reasons I struggled with addiction for so long was because I hated myself. And I had a long list of character defects. Whereas today, I still have character flaws like anybody else, but I don't judge myself for it. And I worked on myself so much that I got to a point where I actually love myself today. And I'm so happy that I could say that, because for the longest time, I could never say that. I hated life and I hated myself. It was very easy. I shouldn't say very easy. One of many reasons I struggled with addiction for so long was because I didn't love myself and I hated life. So why would anyone want to be clean if they feel that way? And that's why I'm studying to be a social worker, because what I had mentioned before about waking up every day and wanting to die but not having the guts to do it, if I could help anyone that comes to me for help, I don't want to impose myself on anyone, but anyone that comes to me for help, if I can help prevent them from going through what I went through, or if they're already going through it, help them get out of it in any way. I mean, that's what I want to do. What I went through, I don't wish on my worst enemy. The last time I used heroin was April 1st, 2015, and I had overdosed for the 7th time. I was found in my mother's apartment completely by chance. My mother was at work for the day. She works 12 to 13-hour days, and this was at 10 in the morning that I was found, so she wasn't coming back anytime soon. My parents are divorced, and my father was the one that found me. The door just happened to be unlocked, which it's never unlocked, and he just happened to want to check on me. And thank God he did. EMTs told him I was about 2 minutes away from death. And all of this, again, is not an exaggeration. I woke up in the hospital after this 7th overdose, and I felt like I had been through enough, put myself through enough, and my loved ones, that I was like, I can't take it anymore. It's either this or I'm just going to end it. Once I rediscovered my passion for life and started doing things that made me want to wake up in the morning, I got to a point where I wanted to be sober more than I wanted to be high. And when you reach that point, it's not easy, but much easier to stay clean, because when you're at a point where you want to be high more than you want to be sober, in my opinion, there's almost no chance that you're gonna stay clean. At least not for a while, not for long term.
Sorry to say, but I haven't met too many people who actively want to stop using heroin.
Me neither.
Neither
They want to stop, but
neither have you.
yeah, no, I haven't.
So what makes you optimistic that they can be helped if they don't want help? It cannot be forced down their throat, can it?
Well, what makes me optimistic is I think that all users will experience a point where they've been through enough, like I did. Either that or they'll die, which I don't, obviously that's just an unfortunate reality. But the ones that don't die, when they reach that point, that's what gives me optimism, that they'll either continue on the path and just completely self-destruct, or they'll have that, moment of clarity and be like, okay, I need to do something to turn it around. That, and I also think with my ideas, and not just me, but people that are like me, I think if enough of us get together and for this cause to make a change, I think change can happen. I mean, as a studying to be a social worker, you could go down the clinical path, or you could go down research and policy. And as much as I love clinical and working with patients, I think if I go down a path of doing research, if my ideas can be implemented into policy, that'll affect much greater numbers. And I think things like that give me optimism for the future. I think it's very easy to stay clean or to talk a good game when things are going well. But by no means have things been completely peachy in the last 2.5 years, especially the first year when, they say it takes someone my age 8 to 12 months for their brain to start to go back to normal and to think normally again. I mean, when I was using, I at least, with depression, I got relief when I used. So getting off that substance that I used every day, experiencing depression and not having an outlet, or at least not my main outlet anymore, was a major challenge. So no, in the last 2, I know that me doing well right now is not BS, because I've had so many challenges and because life hasn't been, easy, and I've seen how I've gotten through it and how I've coped with things, and that has just built my confidence so much more and shows me that I can if I could get through this, I could get through anything.
Wow, that was super real. Listening to Mark tell his story, which, goddamn, what a hell of a guy. He's been through a lot. Listening to his story definitely makes me never want to try opioids. Like, I needed another reason other than, all of the news stories about people dying left and right. But, yeah, that was very informative.
I have to tell you that while a large number of people start from abusing opiates, let's say experimenting with opiates right away, some people, and it's also a quite significant proportion, are exposed to the use of opiates initially for treatment of pain, either severe acute pain after severe trauma or very profound surgeries that then cause pain syndrome. And then go on to become addicted.
Yeah, I've been talking to a lot of people about this, and a lot of people have been saying like, "Oh, well, addiction's not really more of a problem now than it's ever been, right? I mean, people are always addicted to drugs, but it's like opioid addiction. I mean, they're calling it an epidemic now, and as far as I understand it, and you're of course the expert,
Right.
it's because partly more and more people were being prescribed painkillers and like opioids for pain medication, and then became dependent on those, and then like what happened with Mark, switched to heroin because it's cheaper.
It's very hard for me to say how accurate the statement is. I also would like to learn significantly more, not from books and not from the internet, but just as a student of life, as you said,
Students of life.
Yes, about what is really going on. But what I'm noticing is that in the modern culture, experimenting with drugs, basically any drugs, is okay. So is it a good thing or not? I prefer not to pass the judgment, but of course, things that are so powerful and so artificial are capable of damaging the brain. And maybe we should leave it at that and wait until the next week when Dr. Charles Perkel is going to talk to us about his very intense experience with treating drug addiction. So, Master McMaster, I'm suspecting that even for this rather grim subject, you still are able to come up with a eudaimonia moment for us.
In the darkest moments, Dr. Schultz, you have to come up with your eudaimonia moment. It's
I
almost
agree.
more necessary, right?
I agree.
Yeah, no, and I mean, this is a tough one, right? Because, yikes. So I think the eudaimonia moment that we can take away from today's grim topic is actually from Mark's story, because it's kind of an inspiration, right?
Yes, I agree.
It's what his story has shown, at least to me, is that anyone can make a change in their life. And it doesn't matter at what point in your life you're at. It doesn't matter how old you are, or if things aren't going as planned. It doesn't matter how far off track you've gotten. You can always make a change and do something to make your life better, to make it so that you are living your best life. I mean, look at Mark. He was addicted to heroin. He was in and out of rehab. His family wasn't speaking to him, and now he's back with, like, close with his family. He's in grad school, and he's pursuing something that he's extremely passionate about. He has found his eudaimonia moment, and he's living his best life.
Yes, it's fantastic. The only thing I can add is that in order to achieve a eudaimonia moment, or any moment, one needs to wish to achieve that moment.
Exactly, yeah. And like you said to Mark, it wasn't the methadone
Right.
that helped him overcome his addiction. It was him.
Him.
And him wanting to overcome the addiction. And what I like about this message is I think it applies to addiction, but also so far beyond that. This can be for anything. If you're in a career you don't like, if you're in a toxic relationship, any kind of thing, you can always make a change.
I agree. And I think on this positive note, we can sign out and invite our listeners to listen to the second part of this extended episode about drug addiction.
Yeah, so join us next week, everyone, for part 2 of our foray into drug addiction. So today we got to hear from someone who's struggled with drug addiction. Next week we're going to hear from someone who's been on the other side of things and works as an addiction psychiatrist. So until next time, signing off, BS 9000.
keep your brains open to our podcast and keep them shut for drugs, you people.
Goodbye. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of BrainStorm 9000. If you like us, love us, or marginally tolerate us, hey, go ahead and subscribe, rate, and give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever the hell you listen to your podcasts.